All right, another podcast from the Michigan Institute of Athletics in Brighton, Michigan. It's going to be an awesome podcast today. I'm honored to have the lead general for the National Guard here in Michigan in studio. Right before we get into it, I want to shout out VetLife. VetLife is a 501c3 nonprofit company. It's a company of veterans for veterans. Every veteran faces difficulties when they transition from active duty back to civilian life, and VetLife is there to ease that transition. If you want to reach out to VetLife, you can do so through Instagram or Facebook, or check out their website at vetlifetoday.org. So without further ado, I want to introduce Paul D. Rogers, the General of the National Guard here in Michigan. I'm incredibly honored to have you in the studio. I'm really looking forward to your story. I don't know if you've seen any of my episodes, but this is how I start all of them. I don't want to know about the man you are today yet. I want to take it all the way back. Where were you born and raised? What were you like as a kid? What was the family dynamic like? What were the things that really shaped you as a young man? And then we'll start to craft who you are today.
Well, good afternoon, James. I'm happy to be here and looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So, like I said, whatever you want to start with, we'll just start at the very beginning. You tell me about where were you born and raised, what your family was like, and then we'll get up and running.
Okay, well, I'll start and then follow your lead. But I was born and raised in Calumet, Michigan, so it's the west end of the Upper Peninsula and the Keweenaw Peninsula, about nine and a half hour drive from here. Grew up typical family, four brothers and sisters, three older, one younger, and great family life, great everything, upbringing, small town. It was a mining town, largely logging too, but mostly mining, copper mine. So it was just kind of average, small town in Michigan at the time, hustling and bustling when I was really younger, and then as the copper mines closed, it really started to, shrink and turn into just a town struggling to survive when the economy changes like that. So, but a great upbringing, great environment for kids.
That's awesome. You probably learned so much about character development. You learned hard work at a young age. You saw a blue-collar family working for the things that they had. It sets a great foundation for life, right? You got along well with your brothers and your sisters.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, we've been pretty blessed like that. No real family conflicts. Really got along well. My brother, my older brother, was 6 years older, and then my older sisters were 8 and 9 years older. So there was quite a span between the three of them, and then myself, and then I had a younger brother, 2 years younger than me. So again, growing up, great life, a lot of outdoor stuff, had camps on small lakes up there, so we were always out and about. Grew up riding motorcycles and just being outside and not inside. So it was really a wonderful environment to grow up in. Again, safe, secure town, and you're held accountable by not only your family, but everybody in the community. So you didn't get away with anything.
Yeah, that's great. It's just a great basis for success later on in life. You had to learn how to be a functional member of working society at a young age. Were athletics a big influence on your life? Was religion a big influence on your life? What were the things that, when we're young, we're searching for identity? And a lot of the times the things that we partake in build that identity, and then self-confidence and things come from that. What were those things for you?
Yeah, family is first and foremost. Again, close-knit family. We did everything together, went everywhere. Behind that, you really had a school system that was very positive and structured and focused on education. So that was a consistent element throughout my younger years. And then sports. Sports was always there, and we went to church, not religiously, if I can use that term, but we went up through and were active church members younger. But sports were part of it. Started playing ice hockey at the age of 4 and really played that through my entire youth. Took a break, during high school and college, just pick up intramural, that kind of stuff. And then, you get back into that as you get older, and it's a great, the beer league, if you will, use that term. So hanging out with the guys, and it's more of a social thing than anything, but staying fit and active.
Gives you a little bit of that nostalgia. You remember playing as a kid. It's still a blast. You know what I mean? Even though it's changed a little bit, that joy is still there.
Yeah, you're playing for the fun and for the camaraderie and stuff, and it's great. But, yeah, I grew up playing on outdoor rinks where we had to go and sweep the ice in between games and shovel it off and then hose it down with hoses. And it was a community effort. So parents, everybody took care of the ice. It wasn't like it is today where you have, hired folks that are part of the city or community that are being paid to take care of it. It was everybody was doing their part.
Yeah, and there's something about that contributing to common goals or, things that are good for the entire community. There was more of a sense of that, I felt like, a long time ago. People kind of were willing to inconvenience themselves. Like, you might not want to do that on a Saturday, but you wanted your kids to be able to get on the ice and play. And you wanted to see them all having a good time, so you were willing to kind of put the energy into something that was bigger than you, right? Like, that was more of a common theme.
Yeah, everybody was expected to contribute and participate and give back to the organization, the association, and it wasn't the way it is today where there tends to be paid members, paid supporters, and everybody just comes, uses, and leaves. Everybody had to contribute.
Yeah, and that's something that I do really wish would come back, that sense of, instead of it just being about you, if you look on broader terms for things, there's a lot of good that we can do. There's a lot of good when we can come together, right? So what did you think you were going to be when you grow up? You're going through school, you're playing sports a little bit, you've got a good family life, you have your older brothers and sisters to look up to see what they're doing in life. What did you think, was in store for you?
Yeah, when you're really young, you get all the different phases you go through. So, being, a park ranger was the probably, if I go way back, that was the thing that jumps out at me, something like that. But then really the next phase was considering the military. I was considering enlisting in the military. My father was in World War II in the Navy, so he came kind of from that. Just spent the war years. He dropped out of high school to enlist, and then he had to go back after the war was over and finish up school. So, he had gone through that, and I just remember probably 16, 17, and sitting at the kitchen table, and my father was one. He never gave advice to anybody. That was kind of a rule of his. You don't, give advice unless asked for it. So just sitting at the kitchen table, and he asked me one day, so what are you going to do? And I talked, I might enlist in the Army. I was thinking Army Ranger, that kind of thing. And I blame John Wayne for that. I said I grew up on John Wayne movies, and he won every war if you just watch his movies. But so that was kind of at that age where I was contemplating that. And now his advice to me, he was enlisted at the time, and he goes, that's honorable. You can do that and have a great career and just, really, serve your nation and everything. And he just kind of said, or, you know what, you're going to spend time having a bunch of stupid people tell you what to do. He goes, or you can go to school, get your commission, get a degree, and you can rise to be one of those stupid people. So I often tell that story just jokingly, because now as a 2-star and leading, the National Guard here in Michigan, I think I've hit the pinnacle of stupidity by his definition there. He respected all military service, regardless of where you wanted to be, what your goals were, where you saw yourself in the future. But for me, his own son, he wanted me to enter and really, continue to strive to get to the top. So 100%. That was his easy way of explaining it.
He almost pushed you for the leadership roles. He said, if you're going to do it, why not climb the ranks and be like an influential member that can really steer things in the right direction? Yep. It makes sense. And honestly, I can only speak I'm only 34, but if you wind the clocks all the way back to when I was a child, there was a lot of patriotism in the country, and there was a lot of feeling of unity. And like the hero story was the man that would like enlist and defend his family and defend his freedoms. And, whether you went military or not, like we kind of had that vision that was a great, honorable pathway to follow. And it's shifted a little bit over time, like in current society. I've been looking at military enrollment numbers, and they're kind of plummeting, which we might talk about that a little bit later on the podcast. Yeah. But when you were growing up, the John Wayne character, that is the American hero. That is the man that is going to make a difference. His life has meaning. You saw lineage from your father. You witnessed a man, you looked up to your father like most young boys do.
Oh, yeah.
So you instantly have your father as a hero figure in your eyes. And you're like, how can I rise to be like that? And then he gave you that advice to pursue it. So when you first enlist you went to school first before you enlisted in the military.
Yeah, I went to Michigan Tech. Started my time there, but I joined ROTC right at the outset. And then at that time they were in terms. So you had 3 terms in a year instead of 2 semesters, which is typical today. After my first term, the Army gave me a scholarship for my rest of my degree. So I was a scholarship cadet then in Army ROTC for the rest of my time.
So what does that period of your life look like? Because I'm a gentleman that's never done military service. You're going to school. You're working to get your degree. What degree are you working towards? And then how do you fit in the military requirements or service from the National Guard? Like, what does the period of time look like for you as a young man?
Yeah, so, I think maybe backing up a little bit more, my parents instilled in me a strong work ethic, all of my brothers and sisters. So from as young as I can remember, I've been earning money, whether it was, picking strawberries and selling them alongside the road, or night crawlers. We always had a night crawler stand because we were on the main road. And we always did that, had a paper route as a kid, and then had jobs, underground mine tour, guide, and those kind of things. And then, so when I was in school, even though I had a full ride scholarship, I still had a job working for a local sporting goods store. So did that along the way in parallel. But it was balancing school. The ROTC requirements was well nested in that. They do a pretty good job integrating that in because academics comes first, even though you're in the ROTC program. So that was well integrated, and then I worked on top of it. So I was never the greatest student. Always did just enough to get by. I would study and crash for a test the night before. I was not disciplined academically, and that was probably my greatest shortcoming as a kid. Even through high school, I did just enough to make sure I could pass a test, but I wasn't looking to excel.
Were you not fully engaged in it? Is that why? It's like your passion wasn't really wrapped up in it. So you're like, hey, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get by because I know I have to. But like you weren't really called to it because a gentleman that's rose to be general of the National Guard, you obviously have incredible work ethic. And when you go all in on something, you obviously have the ability to excel. But what was it that was just not it with academics?
Yeah, school and the way it was taught didn't work for me. I'm more hands-on. I need to be able to visualize what they're saying. And the academics at the time, and probably even I would struggle today, it's too structured. It's not focused on the way I learn, and it never turned me on. I was never excited for school. Even eighth grade, my advisor told me I didn't have the aptitude for college, so focus on skilled trades. And that was his guidance, and he put me into all of those courses for skilled trades. And my neighbor worked within the high school, and she in the summer would type up the schedules for everybody, and she knew me since birth. So she called my mother, and the two of them actually changed my courses for high school and put me on the college track. But if it wasn't for them, I would have been on a non-college track educational program because the school did not see in me an academic aptitude. It never really resonated with me. It was like they were speaking a foreign language. Got through that. Even through college, I struggled because, again, they put out this information. I didn't have good study habits. I wasn't taught in high school how to study as an independent person. It was always the kind of monolithic process you get put through. So it took me about 3 years in college to learn how to study. And then by the time I hit my 4th year, I was hitting the dean's list. But if you look at the first couple of years, man, I was teetering on not surviving college. So it really I had to figure out for myself how I learned best and then start to apply it. And since then, I've gone on to get my PhD.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's never that you didn't have the aptitude. It's never that you didn't have the intelligence or that you couldn't grasp the concepts. It was the format for learning that said you have to kind of fit in this box. That didn't fit you. And until you re-engineered your own mind to say, okay, if this is the system and this is how information gets presented, how do I take what is being done and make it so that I can excel in it? Which,
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a ton of personal growth that some people never make that adjustment. So you luckily figured it out and made it work for you. But I think there's a lot of people out there that struggle with that, where they just don't fit into the box.
Absolutely. They get left behind.
100%. And now next thing you know, since they're outside of the box and they're not fitting in it, you tell that person, hey, you shouldn't be on the college track. You need to go to skilled trades. What if you would have listened to that person's advice?
I look at it and I think I would have had a wonderful life. I think, an individual makes things happen for themselves. They find happiness. They find satisfaction in the job and family. That's an individual responsibility. So I think I would have found the niche, but it would have been a very different path than I ended up on. And that's, so many people say, what was your plan? I never had a plan. I was just like stumbling from event to event, and things happened and opportunities were presented to me, opportunities were seized. So if it's more of a tortured path as you work through. In fact, even when now you got to remember, my father grew up during the Depression. He was probably 16 when his father passed away, and that was 41-ish or so, and we're at war and that kind of thing. So again, a very smart man, but school just never turned him on. It never was his thing. So I mean, when he was old enough to drop out of school, enlist in the Navy, go to war, he knew enough when he got back to finish school, and he did. But again, that wasn't his thing. And then, so he grew up in that Depression with all of, the struggles that come with that. So even when I'm going to Michigan Tech, one of the, premier engineering schools for mechanical engineering, and I'm working through that on a full scholarship, he still insisted that I go and take the postal exam, because that was a government job. And again, in his life, government job meant job security, meant you didn't have to worry about mine closures, layoffs, the cycle we see the auto industry go. So in his mind, growing up, get the government job. So even if it meant me stepping away from a college degree in engineering, that's what he focused on. So I took the exam, but never followed up on it, just to appease him, I guess, and then finished my education, and then was commissioned as a second lieutenant, but went into the National Guard because I did have an engineering degree for the Army as a civilian offered to me at the end.
So every dot ended up lining up in your future, but because you stayed the course, you stayed on the path that you believed in that aligned you to where you are now. And I feel like very often you hear that story from parents where they're just trying to pass down an easy life to their child. In their mind, he's like, hey, based on all the programming and every bit of information I've gathered, son, do this and you'll be safe.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, really what parents need to realize is your goal is to build the strongest individual that you can, the strongest person. And strong people can blunder into things. The way you said that, where you said, listen, I just kind of stumbled from one thing to the next. That is honestly the way that so many of my friends or people that I know that are incredibly successful, that's what they've done. But they were strong individuals. They could take life lessons. They could learn from failure. They could level up. They can transcend difficulty. And they just stay the course. And next thing you know, you blunder yourself right into a high level, highly functioning, great aspect of society. So I want to talk about now when you really start to see that the military is going to become like a quintessential part of your story. Because what I'm hearing is you're on the academic route, you're in ROTC, but you go on to get your PhD. So you easily could have gone the direction of academics. You had a million choices in front of you. What made you stay on course with the military? And then when did you really get some of your breaks, or what were the big lessons you learned during the journey?
Yeah, so I think, again, I think patriotism kind of underpinned my interest in the military. Of course, family had military background, limited wartime, but once I got into ROTC and I'm getting my engineering degree, I had an opportunity to come down as a co-op student. So I'm still in the university, but I get to take a semester off and come work somewhere. And I actually worked in the research center for the U.S. Army over in Warren, Michigan. At the time, it was the Tank and Automotive Research Center, TARDEC. And and I think that also helped flip a switch for me, because that was right in my junior year. I talked about really academically, wasn't too excited. I went there for a summer and worked with a group of engineers, and I saw what I was learning applied, and I saw how interesting that could be. And that's what I think flipped the switch academically for me to go back and focus now that I could see the application. And that changed. And then, going through the senior year, that's where I'm thinking, I want to be an engineer, but I want to do it for the Army. So when I came out of college, I had my military career in the National Guard, but in parallel, I had a civilian engineering degree with the United States Army in research and development in Warren. So that allowed me to kind of scratch both itches. And I think throughout my entire career, what has set me up for success is that both my civilian experience and my military experience were tied together because it was focused on the Army and the military.
That makes sense. You're completely integrating the two things together. It's not, hey, is this guy going to leave the military and go to a civilian route, or is he just going to commit all in and give up on his other thing? Right. It's integrated. It almost is the perfect pathway into what you were going into. And I love how you said, once I witnessed the information actually being put to use, and you had a real world hands-on example, and you said, oh, this is what we're doing here. It's not the textbooks and the hours of lecture. And what I'm trying to do is develop critical thinking skills and the ability to process information so that I can handle these real world situations. Then it was a game changer for you.
Yep, and that's really what my engineering degree, because I'm a terrible engineer still, but even with a PhD in mechanical engineering, I'm a terrible engineer, because I'm much more visual, I'm much more kind of intent-driven as opposed to the numbers and the crunching and the formulas. So from an engineering perspective, what that education gave me was those critical skills to think, to break complex problems down, to redefine them in a way I can start to approach them and successfully achieve. So that was really the benefit of that engineering degree for me. But then working within this dual life, but all surrounding the military, I was able, as an engineer, to understand the application for the people who wear the uniform, because I was doing that also. And then when I'm wearing the uniform, I could understand the equipment and I could understand how to fully use it to our benefit. So it was that symbiotic relationship that really played out well for me.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And you're like the necessary in between that has to exist to be able to convey both worlds together. Like, you're bringing two things together, and that is a necessary component for the military. They have to have people like that. So when you get into your first role of leadership, because being a general is all about leadership, right? Yep. Your people skills, your accountability, your responsibility, your ability to break down very complex things at times and come up with the right answer. And you're entrusted to a lot of important decisions, and you have a lot of people that are counting on you. I don't know how many people a general oversees, but it's got to be a couple 100,000 here in Michigan, right?
No, in Michigan it's about 11 or 10,500.
Maybe a couple 100,000 nationally, because it's only okay.
Yep.
So when you get in your first role of leadership, what was that like for you? Now all of a sudden the buck stops at you, and that's a different thing in society. How did you embrace that role? What did you learn when you transitioned from student of the game to your first leadership role? And then how did that develop over your career to get to a 2-star general?
Yeah, well, I think that's the jewel of being in the military. It's that leadership. So right out of college, I don't know anything, and now I'm responsible for a 40-person platoon in my National Guard role, and I'm a platoon leader.
You got promoted to platoon leader right away.
As soon as you become a second lieutenant, you take command of a platoon, which is typically right around 40 individuals. And now what you learn quickly is that the senior NCO, who's been there forever, if they're good, they're grabbing you and kind of putting reins on you because you're this untrained horse that just wants to drive off and go, do things. And they are the ones that bring the discipline and the understanding of how to lead individuals, how to read, the morale of the unit and how to really do the right things. So what's nice about the military is that you have this constant progression of leadership roles. And when you make a mistake at one level, you learn from it, and it doesn't prevent you from succeeding at the next level. So it's really an experience that gives you an opportunity to learn how to lead, learn how to empathize with the people you're leading, how to understand them, and how to make good, sound decisions. And as you progress, you make mistakes. Every day you're making mistakes, but the good people around you helps you survive those mistakes, learn from them, and it makes you a better leader at the next stage. You never get that on the civilian side. You don't get that until maybe later in your career, where all of a sudden you're responsible for a group of people. And I think on the civilian side, they struggle with leadership and how to hold people accountable, how to communicate, how to give direction in an effective way. And that's something the military teaches you from day one.
Yeah, leadership dynamics have been changing rapidly, even in the course of my life. Like, I remember back in the day, a lot of leaders ruled through fear and through you're going to get this done or else, or threat of punishment, or, management roles played that style where it was like, hey, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, you're just gone. And they ruled with this kind of iron authority. Well, the problem with that is people will do enough to get by, but they don't really respect you. They might respect your position, but they don't really look at you like a leader that they would follow into any situation and say, I trust this person's judgment, guidance. I know that, to know that a leader cares about you and is trying to bring out the best in you is one of the greatest examples of leadership out there. And over time, I think we've seen that shift in culture. And it's even, in my opinion, from the outside looking in, shifting in the military, where you're getting more leaders that have compassion and they have understanding, but they still have the, drive to bring out the best in you. It's like my job as a leader is to help you find what your greatness looks like. That's been shifting over time. You know what I mean? And how have you seen that change over the course of your career? Because I'm sure leadership back in the day might have been different than the way that you lead now. Or do you think there's some continuity?
I think it's more continuity because I think it's situation based. If you're, there are times when you can be a coach and you can be a mentor. There's times when you can let the people you're working with fail and take risks. And then there are other times where you absolutely cannot, and you need to come in and you need to drive the outcomes personally. And there is no time for debate or discussion. Usually in the military environment, that's when life is at stake. I think as you grow as a leader and you learn, there are many different leadership styles, and a good leader knows which one is appropriate at a given time. So I'm still very much a work in progress. I overstep my bounds. Sometimes I'm too aggressive when I need to back off. Sometimes I'm too direct and curt with people when I need to be a little bit more empathetic. And so I think, I think it's important to always kind of look in the mirror at the end of the day and take stock. And every day I do something, I'm like, oh my God, why did I say that, or why did I do that? But I think if you're willing to kind of look internally and hold yourself accountable while you're holding others accountable, maybe you get a pass when you have those weak moments and you fail, to lead in the appropriate way.
100%. Even if you acknowledge them as I could have done better there, that is a constant reminder of the path you're trying to walk. That self-reflection is going to help you stay on course because you're going, I could have been better than that, versus the person that believes they can do no wrong and you'll just trample anyone that's in your way. And you said something, you really dropped some gold insight there where you said, like, a real leader has to almost be a master strategist of when to employ different tactics to bring out the best. Best result.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you have to read, and I always kind of say you have to know your team better than anyone else knows your team. You have to know the situation you're facing and work to understand and gain greater understanding in it so you can help lead them through it. And there are times when you have to let them go at it, and then there's other times when you have to step in and take, total control and drive the outcome. But learning how to read that, that's something you have to develop over years and years and years. And I think in the civilian market, they struggle with that many times. You get those leaders that are profit oriented, and they'll just weed out the weak, if you will, on their team, and they're just looking to replace and replace and replace. And there's some big, very iconic companies in the United States that are celebrated for their innovation, but when you really peel it back, it's a survival of the fittest. They'll hire 100 people knowing only 10 will survive, but because they're an iconic company, they have this long list of people fighting to get in, and they can have that very kind of
Massive turnover rate.
Yeah, survival kind of environment, and they can still succeed. Other companies that are, need to attract the right talent, they need to really pay attention and be very focused on the needs of their employees, both inside the job and outside the job, and really cater to those needs to really attract the right talent.
Sure, and a lot of younger kids now are more sensitive to the culture in companies. So when they go into a company and the culture is not right, or it's not something that's conducive of what they're looking for in a work environment, they just leave. They just quit it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the company's scrambling going, it's these kids, they don't want to work, they don't want this, that, or the other thing. And it's like, have you ever looked and thought maybe it is the culture you've established? Maybe it's the leader, maybe it's the manager in your academy, or I'm sorry, not academy, but business, that is driving the people out. Do you think it is all just them? I call that a common denominator.
Yeah.
If all of these people are doing this, then there's probably something inside that you need to change or adapt to, or just point fingers until you have no more business. You have to adapt to the changing conditions.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is almost the perfect segue into the question of military enrollment has been declining substantially, almost to the point where it's like truly a major issue or upcoming crisis. What do you think are the factors driving that, and what can be done to change people's overall view and opinions of the military so that enrollment rates, because like I said, when you were growing up, when I was growing up, patriotism and serving the country was held at like a very high honor. If you did that, it was an honor. And now there was examples of like Vietnam vets and stuff coming home that did not get the treatment they deserved.
Yeah.
And they held a lot of resentment for that. And they remember feeling like they had their backs turned on, people turned their backs on them, and they didn't feel appreciated, which I'm sure had ripples through society. But what do you think are the things that are changing young kids wanting to get in the military, and what can be done to change the trajectory of that trend?
Yeah. Well, I think you brought up a couple thoughts, and I want to maybe pull one thread in a different direction than what you just introduced. I think, we talk about the greatest generation. We typically refer to the World War II veterans. But if you look at how service members are treated today, that response and that admiration typically comes from that Vietnam generation. So they suffered, but they set that suffering aside and that mistreatment, and they, I don't know what the right term is, they look after today's generation. So, I think we need to take a look at that definition of the greatest generation, and, maybe judge generations based on how they treat the younger generations. And through that lens, you really got to reassess the Vietnam generation and what they've done. So maybe a little shout out to them. Now, you talk about the current trends. We've had a very good recruiting trend for a number of years. Even for active duty, they had to really incentivize people to join, over the last 20 years for the war effort. But in the National Guard, we have not had to. There's incentives, there's recruiting bonuses, there's educational benefits, there's this litany of benefits to serving, but we've had a fairly consistent track record of being able to meet our goals year over year. Something changed in the last 12 to 15 months. And what we've seen nationally is this downward trend in interest in military service. And the numbers I'm hearing right now is that from historical averages, there's about a 20% drop in recruitment for the services, active duty, reserve, National Guard. And what we're starting to see here at Michigan is a similar type of drop. Not quite at that pace, but it is becoming much more difficult. So the propensity to serve, the interest in serving has lessened, and it's been in a very short window of time. So there's a lot of people struggling with the why, and we've been talking about it. So there's a lot of things that kind of overlap that people point to. One is the exit out of Afghanistan and the difficulty and the perception that left in people's minds as to the success of being in the military. Some point to that. Others point to the COVID vaccine mandate, and there are some people adamantly opposed to receiving the vaccine. And if they know it's a mandate in the military, the last thing they're going to do is join the military where they're forced to take the vaccine. So that's playing into it. I think the others is that there's just this drop in the workforce. There just doesn't seem to be as many people out there for the workforce. And I don't know if there's an increased demand for employees or if it's really just a drop in people interested in it being employed. But the number of people available and the competition for talent is extensive. So when you can go and work at a fast food restaurant at an equivalent rate as you can in any other, comparable job, or in joining the military, and you get college benefits and you get health benefits, and you don't have that military service requirement, it's an easy economic trade if you're just looking economically. So patriotism is there. It's alive and well. Michigan, we're blessed here. We have a great patriotic tone and environment within Michigan. So that continues to support us. But we have other competing demands and other competition in the workforce and in society that's drawing people away, and we need to take a look at it. The military, I'll go down this path, not to get too technical, but when you look at the military age population in the United States, 350 million people roughly, and those of military age, only 23% of them qualify for military service.
Well, I had no idea of that.
Yeah.
Why is the number so low?
Obesity, criminal records, drug use, mental health, all those different factors come in, and it pulls people out. So when you are now,
do you know the historical numbers for that? Like, let's say we went back to the 80s. How many people in that general demographic would have qualified? Like, what would it have been? How many people would have said, hey, the percentage is this many? Do you have any?
I don't recall what that is. I don't know.
It's got to be substantially higher than 20-some%.
I would think it's a lot higher than that. Yeah, and obesity is a big deal. Also, kids being prescribed behavior-based medications at a young age now prevents them from joining the military. Asthma, medical conditions like that seem to be on the rise. That prevents people from joining in some conditions. And every individual needs to be looked at individually. But those are kind of the things that pop up the most that prevents people from joining.
So there's a massive other issue that I wasn't taking into consideration. The pool that you were pulling from initially keeps getting smaller and smaller. Correct. And smaller because I didn't even think of that aspect of it. Yep. And society has definitely been struggling with a lot of mental health crisis and opiate epidemic. Remember that right before 2020? That was one of the main things we were discussing. And there's a lot of things plaguing society. And then all of a sudden, I didn't know that there was requirements. I knew that you couldn't be a felon. There were certain criminal things. I understood those. I didn't realize how narrowed down the pool is getting, that you then, from those people, you need those people to want to step up.
Correct.
And join the military.
Correct. Yep. And we're at a point where only 1% of our nation's citizens ever serve in the military. 1%.
1%.
1%. Yep. So you really look at the shrinking pool of folks that qualify, and then their interest in serving.
You completely, you gave me a perspective that I had never considered before, and that's massive. And one of the things you had brought up, the vaccine mandate, I have two friends that had to leave military service because they didn't want to get the vaccine, both with documented cases of COVID that have natural immunity. The CDC just now finally said that you don't need to test people that don't have symptoms any longer, and natural immunity and vaccine immunity will both be acceptable.
Yep.
Is the military now dropping the vaccine mandate so we can get normal people back in? What about all the people that were discharged and kicked out? Imagine if you're a young kid that grew up with your dream of serving. you had a military lineage in your family. We ran into that 2020 difficult event and you get kicked out of the military. Are you welcome to come back in? What, like, are those, I don't understand that dynamic of it. Are we keeping that mandate still, even with all the things going on?
As of today, that mandate is still in place, and we're currently working through exemptions. There are medical exemptions that people can apply for. There are religious exemptions that they can apply for, and we're still working through that as a Department of Defense. And it's going to be interesting to see how they work that out over time. My goal is to keep people interested, keep them in, and encourage them to not just say no, but to apply for the exemptions if their belief system is behind their opposition, and let that process play out. I think anybody who's patriotic enough, who's focused enough to defend this nation, we got to give them every possible chance to stay in. And once a decision is made, we will follow those rules and we will apply those policies. But our goal is to keep people engaged and positive in their mind and spirit about service, and then let's see where the decision makers take us.
100%. And hopefully those decision makers say, hey, we'd rather have that young kid that's wanting to dedicate his life to this, service and this cause. We'd rather have him in than out. You know what I mean? Whether he follows the mandate or not, like they've done multiple studies showing that natural immunity is perfectly fine for young, healthy people. The military is a young, healthy demographic, not obese, because there are requirements. All of the things that you would look for to be the, population that is really not at threat. The military is a quintessential example of that group of people. So hopefully, like you said, the decision makers can say, hey, we've got these issues. We've got more information now. A lot of things have come to light. We're going to make adjustments so that we can, keep things on the right track. So as you've moved up through the positions all the way up to a 2-star general, I asked you about this before the podcast, but I think it's great to capture this on here. How do you avoid imposter syndrome, which is what people refer to as when you get to this brand new situation, you feel like, man, I'm not qualified to be here. You went from join the military at the base rank, with a college degree, to you are the leader for the National Guard here in Michigan. How do you handle that responsibility and move through that without just feeling unqualified? Not to say that you're not. You're incredibly qualified to be where you are, but that's a big psychological thing to stay on top of being your best. How do you go through those positions and trust the process that you're the man that is meant to lead everybody?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I've never heard it called imposter syndrome before.
It's a common thing that people are referring to now as imposter syndrome, when you get this new position and you don't know if you're fully qualified or prepared for it.
The uncertain, personal uncertainty as the. I'll tell you, within the military, they spend so much time on training, education, and investing in people. I would be surprised if there are very many people that feel that when they get to the next level. I think there's an eagerness to make a difference. There's an eagerness to take responsibility, not only to prove to yourself, but it's to maybe do things better than the previous person. And I think that is the motivation that drives most folks in the military. And from day one, the training never stops. There's formal institutional training. You're always going to a course or a class to prepare you for the next level. And I talked about those non-commissioned officers, those folks that have all these decades of experience. It's part of their job to prepare their leader for that next level of responsibility. So I think there's a institutional focus on leader development, giving people the basic tools to succeed, and then giving them the experience on how to apply those tools in an effective way. And if we allow people to make mistakes, reasonable mistakes at the level they're at now, and learn from it and prepare for the next level, I think it's a very healthy leadership model that goes. So I don't know that anyone. I think most people. Maybe there's a few that internally have that little uncertainty, but most people are eager for that next position and that eagerness to do better than the last person.
You made it make sense. Almost since day one, you've been in an environment that is just trying to build you upward. So when you go upward, it's not really a shock. I mean, that's kind of the trajectory from the beginning is what it sounds like, is you know that I am being prepped to get to the next level if possible. And when I get there, I need to be the man that's going to do the best job possible. I'm going to give all I'm capable of giving and learn from the previous people, figure out how to steer it even, more efficiently for the future, et cetera. You're in an environment that is conducive of you're going to rise if you do the right thing.
Yeah, and if you apply your time and energy and you learn and you take stock in your failures and you self-correct, I think there's an amazing path in the military for that, National Guard or active duty. So it's really, no matter what branch you go into, it is a great and fulfilling experience to work through, and I'm very blessed to have it. And I'll bring up Myers-Briggs, those personality, assessments. I am like so far into the introverted thing. You would think I'd be in a closed closet by myself and never talk to anybody. But I think it's with the experience and the training in the military that forces you to be out front, to take that leadership role. People will accuse me of being an extrovert, but I got the data to prove that I'm far from that. And it's the focus to take those risks, to step out, take lead, make things happen, and that's through training and experience. And it's really, I would encourage anybody to, whether they serve 4 years in the military or 40 years in the military, that experience will be foundational, and it'll help you be more successful no matter what direction you choose to go in the future.
And to be honest, you being that type of person by nature and then having to have built all of the things that you didn't have as natural to your personality almost makes you a more balanced, more complete leader, because you weren't just innately just incredibly extroverted and, type A, assertive, rah, 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 rah. You had to build the entire spectrum. So you're able to see a wide range. You have a much bigger lens. You can dial in when you need to, but you built the inadequacies in your personality up to strengths. And that is really what a great leader does.
Yeah, and again, I'll go back and point to the people around me, because they give me that safe environment to grow and to make that transition and transform. They could pass judgment on you day one and decide you're not there and cut you loose, but you would never then materialize into the leader you could be. And I think that's really what you see in these organizations. A lot of organizational pride, a lot of individual responsibility, and they take that organizational pride and that personal responsibility, and that's what motivates them to invest in somebody that will have a future somewhere else.
So take me through a normal month or year. Like, what does your role look like within the National Guard as the general of the National Guard here? What are your responsibilities? What do you oversee? What are your focuses? Like, what are the things that you're like, okay, it is an objective of mine to complete this? Take me through that.
That is a great question. What a normal month? I haven't experienced a normal month. So I came in, the governor asked me to leave my civilian career and come in and do this full time. And I came in at the beginning of her administration in 2019. Just fast forward a year later, we got this thing called COVID happening overseas, and we're starting to see individual cases in the United States, and then pretty soon we're in full-blown COVID response. And as we're doing that and working through that, we have a 500-year flood up in Midland when the dams broke.
I remember.
And the city gets impacted, and the local residents, and we're responding to support local authorities there, who, by the way, did a phenomenal job. We had almost nothing to do because they did such a great job locally, but we had to respond to that. And then after the George Floyd killing and the unrest across the country, and people protesting, and then some of the rioters that came to really tear up the towns and cities, we had several communities impacted, and we had to respond to support local law enforcement in those communities to just bring some peace and quiet and let the community heal and recover from those riots. So we had that going on in addition to the pandemic. You start to just look at all of these incidents mapped over, and it really speaks to the quality of the people we have in the National Guard, because they were able to respond. And remember, this is your person that owns a corner grocery store, or they're a lawyer downtown, or they work as a mechanic in the local dealership, or these are just normal people in our community, normal neighbors. But when the call comes out, they put this on, and they respond in a moment's notice to go and respond to that flood, respond to the civil unrest, respond to the COVID relief efforts, and they're amazing. So it really over that period of time, you see the strength of the individuals and you see the strength of the organization. So when people talk what's normal, I don't know yet. I'll tell you maybe in a couple of years when then we don't have all of those external influences. But, and alongside all of that, our number one purpose for existing is to fight our nation's wars. We are an operational reserve to the active component. And on any given year, even through COVID, we had between 1,000 and 2,000 members of the Michigan Guard deployed overseas in conflict, whether it be Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Jordan. I mean, all the countries we've heard for the last 20 years. There's not a year where we haven't had a Michigan National Guard member in one of those countries. Africa, Europe, we have a constant presence. And then on the southwest border, we've had over the last 3 years units there helping the Border Patrol deal with the situation on the southern border. So all of these things overlaid over the last 2.5, 3 years. So it's been very complex and kind of crazy. But our number one goal is to prepare to fight and defend the United States.
What an incredibly crucial organization and role in society, too. In a weird way, as you told me that story, it almost painted back to the vision of the community that came together whenever a job needed to be done.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's a group of people that are saying, hey, when I'm called upon and service is needed for a good cause or to protect things or do the right thing, we're going to get together and make sure that we do that. It's the same vision in a formal sense, in a very strategic, guided sense. Now, when troops are deployed from Michigan, let's say the National Guard from Michigan is needed elsewhere, does that not go to like the Department of Defense Command and then they oversee it? That's my understanding. Yeah. Or, okay, does your involvement just stay with domestic, like in Michigan, any incidents, I oversee this, and then if our troops are sent elsewhere, it goes to the Department of Defense? I don't understand that dynamic.
So the National Guard, I'm glad you asked that, because the National Guard is distinct from any of the other entities of military service. So we have two chains of command. One is to the governor, and the governor on any given day is our commander-in-chief, and we are part of that state capability. But we are always, within that, we are funded by the military, by the federal government, federally, to train and prepare to be an operational reserve for the active duty. So we are doing military training within that, even though we are in this state chain of command. But when we are activated as a unit and we put them on Title 10, which is full-time active duty orders, their commander-in-chief is now the president. And we hand that unit off to the active duty military, and they are part of that active military response wherever.
What if there was a disalignment? Like in 2020 or any time, let's say the president was on one side and a state governor was issuing opposite orders. What happens with the National Guard in a situation like that? Do they answer federally or do they answer their governor first? And then I don't understand the dynamic there. Not that it would ever happen. Hopefully we always have alignment. But if there wasn't, how does that work?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, we've been blessed here. Governor Whitmer is phenomenal. She understands the obligation to the national defense and that call and that demand. So she has fully supported our deployment requirements, even the southwest border. Previous administrations were a little hesitant to support any activity on the southwest border. She has provided that leadership. She responded to the previous administration, to this administration. So when we have had a call to federalize and put one of our units on active duty to augment either in the United States or overseas, there's not a single example where we did not meet that obligation to our nation. And that's paramount.
That's wonderful to hear. It is so good to sit and hear you tell me that story, because even if you're out of alignment with someone on certain topics, having the resources and people in the places they should be is paramount. It's crucial. It's essential. And it sounds like she did a good job of making sure that was facilitated, regardless of disagreements that might exist.
Absolutely. Yeah, she's been phenomenal from that standpoint, and really I never knew her before she asked me to take this job. We don't have a history of working together or even knowing each other. And I just tell people, regardless of what their political views are or anything, she is a phenomenal person to work for. She gives me the direction, she gives me guidance, and then I have full latitude within my authorities to get the job done. And it's just been a great pleasure, especially when you look at the complexity of what we've dealt with and all of the demands to have a boss, I'll use that term, who has your back, who supports you, who makes decisions, doesn't hesitate to make a decision, seeks your counsel, and then gets after it, and then gives you full latitude. You cannot ask. I don't care, civilian, military. You cannot ask for anything more than that.
So, what role were you in before you were selected by the governor, and how were you selected? Because that's probably the highest honor you can receive wherever you were at previously, to say, hey, I want you to move up and be the number one in command below me. That's amazing. How did that transition take place?
Yeah, and that's it. People often say, when the president calls you, you don't say no, and when the governor calls you, you don't say no. So I had 29 and a half years as an Army civilian working in the TACOM Detroit Arsenal. And I was 6 months shy of retirement, and I had to resign and walk away from all those benefits and come take this job. Like I said, it's one of those, you don't say no. You do it, and then you figure out, well, in a few years, I'll figure out how to put that mess back together. So that's still in front of me someday, to try to go back and hopefully regain some benefits there. But that was, I worked as a civilian, like I said, in parallel, worked up through the research and development community, and eventually became the director for the Army's Research Center that does automotive research and development. So engines, transmissions, electric vehicles, active protection systems, armor. That is an amazing place. You should find somebody to talk to about.
It's probably unbelievable what they're doing.
Yeah, it really is. And so I had the pleasure of leading that research organization. And then I had just moved over to be the deputy to the commanding general. So, in the civilian world, in the military, they have senior executive service. And it's a group of folks that carry the equivalency of a general officer. So I was equivalent civilian to a 2-star general. And I was again, just looking at the final years of my career there before moving on and doing something else when this position came available. And like I said, I couldn't turn it down. It was a great transition to come in here and work for the governor and work on behalf of the women and men who serve every day in the Michigan National Guard, both in the Army and Air. And it's just it's an absolute pleasure to be part of their formation and be part of their organization.
That's incredible. So looking into the future, and this would be a good way to wrap the podcast up, what are your goals in the current position? What do you see for the next couple of years of your life? What is the legacy you want to leave? Just anything that you're forward thinking into.
Yeah, so I think that experience on the civilian side as a senior executive, I was routinely in the Pentagon. I was routinely in Washington, working at the senior levels of the Army in that particular case, on the future of the Army, looking 15, 20, 30 years down the road for technologies and vehicle systems that the Army would need to be successful on the future battlefield. So I was very aware of the federal process. So when I was able to come in here, I saw an opportunity to really increase federal investments within Michigan, bring the Michigan National Guard up to be a nationally recognized entity, and garner the attention from both the Army and the Air Force for the equities we have here. Again, we could have a whole podcast focused on just what Michigan brings to the table from a national defense perspective. And I saw how we were not being considered and we were not benefiting from that federal DOD investment, Department of Defense investment. And actually, I was on the tail end of a 30-year decline where we had base after base closed, and the Department of Defense was exiting Michigan for 30 years. So my goal going forward, and it has been since day one, is to turn that tide. Show what makes Michigan special, encourage the Department of Defense to acknowledge it, and then start to invest back. So we're right at that point, and the governor's weighing in personally to help and provide the emphasis at the national level. And she has the attention of the White House, of the senior leaders in Department of Defense. And we are right now in the midst of negotiating some potential significant investments back into Michigan from a Department of Defense perspective. So, my goal is to always maintain a ready force, make sure our women and our men have the best training, so when they do get called to that battlefield somewhere else, that they have every tool and leadership experience successful to survive in that environment. But parallel to that, I'm also seeking to bring Michigan back to the forefront of the Department of Defense and ensure we're getting the proper investments to be successful going forward.
That's amazing. I mean, your life story and all the decisions you made and where you were at the point in time put you in the perfect place to be the man for the job based on everything that was going on. And now you're changing the dynamic where you're almost working to make Michigan a gold standard. Instead of it being a slow decline, you're like, we're going to be on the forefront. I kept hearing that word. We're going to be a leader in what you are looking for out of the National Guard. We're not going to be the people that you're slowly cutting out. It's amazing. It's like everything aligned for this to take place. My last question, I guess, is the governor's election is this year, this November. We have no idea whether she'll win or if she'll lose. I haven't looked at the polls. I try to stay generally as far away from politics as possible and just do what I can do. But if that leadership changes, does some new person decide your position, or are you in for a term currently and you can continue the mission regardless?
No, in Michigan, the Adjutant General, and I'm also dual head as the Director for Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. We are part of the governor's cabinet. We serve at the pleasure of the governor. So it will be up to Governor Whitmer, if she's reelected, to decide whether to keep me on or to make a change for the next 4 years. And if there's a new governor coming in, they also have that, they decide who's going to be part of their cabinet and who
But
stays.
they could reinstitute you. They could easily say, hey, Mr. Rogers is showing a fantastic leadership example. He's doing the right thing for Michigan. You look at how he's turned the course of these things. Like, we want to keep him. That can absolutely take place as well.
Yeah, that is well within their right. And again, they're building their team, and like any leader, they're looking for the people that match their interests, their focus, and they pick whoever they feel is best. And
And I would hope that any leadership, whether it's left, right, whatever it is, you should look at competency. That should be the number one factor, is like, how competent are they? And if you're doing a fantastic job and you can show that you are making the necessary changes, I would hope that you would be viewed in that light, you know what I mean? Regardless of who you were elected by or things like that.
Yeah, we will always be judged by our actions, our decisions, and the results we produce. And I've tried to stay focused on that. In the military, we're apolitical, so I don't publicly lean one way or another in the duties I execute. So my goal is I get judged based on my results and whether I'm leading in the way that the governor wants me to be leading the organization. And at the end of the day, if I'm told, hey, thanks, we're moving in a new direction, it's been a pleasure.
You can rest knowing you did your part, and you did it to the fullest of your capabilities.
Absolutely.
Well,
Yeah.
Paul, it was truly an honor to sit with you today. I really enjoyed our time. I learned a lot during this episode, and I hope that anyone that hears this and sees this will see that we have a good man in this position trying his best to make a difference. So
thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
I appreciate the time, and hopefully I was able to tell my organization's story, because it really is the men and women who make this organization successful.
100%. I think you casted a beautiful light down upon the organization. I think that, more people, when they see the leadership, that it's positive, that it's, trying to do things to make America better, making the future better, I think it's going to steer people in the right direction.
Excellent. Great.
Thank
Thank you.